My name's Adam Hook. I work for the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, and I'm based in the National Parks office at Fitzroy Falls. And we've also got Jodie Cooper here. Jodie's also with the BCT and she's based at our Kiama office. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what the BCT is, what we do and how we help landholders protect important plants and animals on private land. Each of the photos you'll see on each of the slides have been taken from a BCT conservation agreement across the southeast. So we're established in 2017 and our primary purpose is to partner with landholders to enhance and conserve biodiversity across New South Wales. We do that in a few different ways. One of them is example here tonight, awareness raising, so this event. And the other way we do it is establishing private land conservation agreements with landholders. And private land conservation is important because over 70% of New South Wales is privately owned, and there's lots of plants and animals found on private land that are not well represented in our national park systems across the state. So there's a number of different agreement types we work with. Tonight I'm mainly going to focus on the conservation agreement because that's most applicable for where we are today. But there's an agreement called a wildlife refuge, and you might have seen it in your travels, the signs up on gates or fences. They're an entry-level type private land conservation agreement. They can be smaller in size sometimes, but they're very similar to land for wildlife agreements. So if any of you already have one of those, it's a similar sort of concept, and Patrick from Council is going to talk about those land for wildlife agreements next. So I won't go into a lot of detail there. There's also an agreement type called a biodiversity stewardship agreement. That's put in place by another government organisation, but they're an agreement that's actually in perpetuity. So that means that they run forever. They're registered on the title of the land and they can generate credits, and the sale of those credits can be used to put back into the agreement area itself to manage things like weeds and pests. But if you're interested in learning more about wildlife refuge agreements or biodiversity stewardship agreements, we're happy to talk to you later about those agreement styles as well. But to get on to conservation agreements, they're also an in perpetuity agreement, so it means that they run forever. They're registered on the title of the land, and when we establish them, we're generally looking for areas that are larger than 20 hectares. However, if you have important habitat on your property, for gliders for example, or threatened species, we can do smaller agreement areas. So private land conservation makes a significant contribution across the state. So nearly 3% of New South Wales has a private land conservation agreement on it, and that compares to about 9.5% for our national parks. We have, in the area that Jodie and I work in, we've got about 500 individual agreements across the southeast region, which runs from here to the Victorian border. And where we're standing tonight in the Wingecarribee, there's about 24 permanent agreements, a bit over 4,000 hectares, and 18 wildlife refuges, which adds up to a bit over 6,000 hectares. So conservation agreements, just in a little bit more detail, they are in perpetuity, so they do offer permanent protection. And a lot of the landholders I work with are really attracted by that. They want to protect their important patch of native vegetation on their property for future generations to come. The agreement generally only applies to part of the property, because sometimes there's lots of other parts of the property that are used for agriculture. They may not be predominantly native vegetation. So we're looking for the areas that are in good condition that are native vegetation. It's important to say that they remain private land. It's just that the landholder is committing to managing that area for conservation for the long term. They do contribute to our national reserve system, and the BCT helps the landholder come up with a management plan. We also develop a thing called a site values report, where we go and map all the vegetation communities that we find there, and we come up with species lists and fauna lists and stuff for the landholder. And landholders often find that really interesting. So what else is in it for landholders? As I've already said, many landholders are motivated by permanently protecting that patch. The property survey, the development of the management plan, and we set up permanent ecological monitoring so that we can see how that area might be changing over time. That's all a free service that the BCT offers. There's a pool of grant funds that are set aside for conservation agreement holders only, and that is to do things that the management plan might spell out, like control weeds or pests. You might need to put up a wildlife friendly fence to exclude stock, for example. The agreement area doesn't have to pay council rates, it doesn't pay land tax. You get ongoing support from BCT staff, and you get to join a network of landholders that have a similar agreement in place. I just would like to talk about one particular landholder that we have. His name's Max. He's down on the south coast, and back a few years ago when we had the terrible fires, the BCT wrote to a number of landholders like Max that had important patches of vegetation left that wasn't impacted by the fires, and they were acting as really important refuges for the animals and plants that were left in the landscape. Max read our information and thought, this is actually what I'm after. I'd really like to protect my patch of bush that I have here on the coast. So I'll just play you a little video.
I sort of arrived in the South Coast in 1962 and lived here for 12 years, and then went to Sydney. Realised I couldn't live in the city, and so then I started looking for a place back here. And then in 1982, which is almost 41 years ago, I bought this place. And I bought it because, well, it was 45 hectares of natural bush, and that's what I wanted, just somewhere to lose myself in. And well, I think we've grown together, this place and I. And I knew I wanted to protect the place because I'd seen other big places around here be denuded of trees and developed into housing blocks, and I didn't want that to happen to this place. And when I read about the Conservation Trust, I thought, this is probably what I want to do. This is somehow I can protect the place, stop it being developed.
It's really good to see a patch of vegetation like this in this sort of fragmented landscape, which is so intact as it is here. One of the other things that's great is the big, large, mature trees, which you don't always see in this landscape, and lots of big hollows in those trees as well, so habitat for animals. And I think in general the condition of the vegetation is really quite good, and should continue to improve.
I think it's a very special place, and I know that there are animals that here that are endangered, like the glossy black cockatoo, and that sort of gives me a thrill, because we have to be very aware now that the environment needs all the protection it can get.
So thank you. Jodie and I will be here if anybody's got any questions. Jodie's coming on the spotlighting. She's got a background in fauna herself, and yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of the night.